It's Game Boy World, and this is a puzzle game that you should actually care about. If it seems I've complained a lot about the ridiculous proliferation of puzzle games on Game Boy, well, that's because Game Boy suffered from a ridiculous proliferation of puzzle games. I have never in my life seen a platform as dominated by a single style of game as I have with Game Boy, especially since crossing the threshold from 1989 to 1990. We've been over the reasons for the genre's explosion here, but in case you missed it, the pokey processor and sluggish screen that defined the Game Boy hardware didn't lend themselves to fast-paced action. Pushing boxes and flipping tiles made for a much better fit to the platform, so developers flooded the system with such games. And as always, where there's abundance, there's crap. That said, there's nothing inherently wrong with puzzle games. The glut of puzzlers on Game Boy can crowd out the sunlight at times and make the more commendable ones hard to spot, but that just makes highlighting the best creations all the more important. So let's stand atop the roofs and sing praises to Vic Tokai's Game Boy debut, the oddly named Daedalian Opus. As puzzlers go, it's the first of its kind on Game Boy, possibly the only one of its kind, in fact. It's basically a video game rendition of those old wooden puzzles where you have a number of pieces that have to be arranged within a given space, just so. Unlike those wooden puzzles, Daedalian Opus offers 36 different puzzle arrangements involving roughly 40 pieces. You might recognize the Daedalian Opus concept more recently from the Monster Manor Streetpass game on 3DS. Every once in a while, you'll bump into another player's Mii who offers you a chance to try your hand at a puzzle box, which amounts to a less taxing version of this game. 36 puzzles may not sound like much, but Daedalian Opus gets challenging in a hurry, and finishing the game is a job for a whole heck of a lot of AA batteries. The first stage consists of 3 puzzle pieces that have to be arranged in a 5x3 grid. It should take maybe 10 seconds for the average adult to solve. The final puzzle, on the other hand, is a giant 8x8 grid that can be solved with 12 pieces. So actually solving the puzzle requires smarts, luck, and determination. See, Daedalian Opus only has a few rules to worry about. Each time you complete a stage, you're awarded a new piece to use. That piece usually, but not always, comes into play in the next puzzle. It doesn't take long before you have more pieces than spaces, so you have to figure out which pieces to play and which to omit. Each puzzle piece you're given contains 5 blocks, kind of like how Tetris's pieces all contain 4 blocks. While this makes for a certain degree of consistency, it's also quite maddening at times. Because you always fill the same number of frame spaces no matter which puzzle pieces you use, you'll frequently come within a single space of completing a level only to find the leftover spaces don't match any of the pieces you have available. The further you get into the game, the more time you spend experimenting with arrangements before uprooting them to start all over again. And finally, just to be nasty, the final piece you're given for level 36 only contains 4 blocks. Though on the plus side, that makes it easier for you to be certain that you actually need to use it there. Overall, this makes for a really great fit for the Game Boy platform. Not only does it stand apart from all the box-pushing and action-based puzzlers we've been seeing of late, it's also a game whose static visuals don't tax the Game Boy in the least. The biggest downside to Daedalian Opus is that it requires such intense concentration for such protracted periods of time that it can cause eye strain from staring so intensely at the Game Boy's dim screen. It definitely makes a strong case for investing in an add-on screen magnifier or light peripheral. The one thing I don't really understand about Daedalian Opus is, well, the name. Obviously it's a reference of some sort to Greek mythology, where Daedalus was the father of Icarus, an inventor who crafted 2 pair of wax wings so he and his son could escape from an island. However, this has nothing whatsoever to do with the game itself, wherein a totally normal kid travels from island to island solving puzzles at the behest of a kindly old man and his fairy companion. I mean, yeah, there's islands and wings and an old dude, but it's still a long way from anything resembling the myth of Icarus. In Japan, the game was simply called Boken Puzzle Road, which makes sense. It's a sort of puzzle adventure that sees you traveling from one puzzle to another on a sort of road. The localized name and the weird artwork don't really connect to the game, and mostly just serve to make it seem standoffish and weird. I think the idea was to appear intellectual, but it didn't quite work out that way. But don't hold that against the game. It's really quite a solid piece of work, and while it doesn't directly affect the way the game plays, I love that you can tell from the art and the font style that this was made by the same team inside Vic Tokai that had been responsible for NES cult classic Clash at Demonhead. They're totally different games, of course, but equally lovable. Simple, challenging, and addictive, Daedalian Opus is the mark that Game Boy puzzlers should have been aspiring for, rather than slumming it with so many Sokoban clones. There's nothing you can do about all the crappy puzzlers that festered on Game Boy, but you can certainly hold gems like Daedalian Opus close to your heart. For more heartfelt looks at fleeting excellence, keep watching Game Boy World. Be sure to check out Game Boy World 1989 in print, and as always, I hope you'll consider supporting this project via Patreon. Next episode, we learn what happens when Nintendo loses the right to the Popeye license.